Is it cold where you're at? It is freezing down here in Northwest Alabama, so it's time to make some soup. Let's get right to it. I'm Jackie from Famished Farm, and our first recipe is from Give Me Some Oven, a cozy autumn wild rice soup. I'm going to start by getting the vegetables ready. I've got my onion peeled. This is a garlic clove that I'm going to peel up. And the recipe called for 4 cloves. We're not garlic lovers, so I'm going to cut that in half. Here I am just going to peel a couple smallish sweet potatoes. It calls for 1 large. This is what I found in the store, though. This was right after Thanksgiving, so sweet potatoes pickings were not so great. It also calls for 2 medium carrots, and I've got 4 here. They're on the small side though, so we'll get those peeled up. The reason I chose this recipe is the wild rice. We love wild rice, and I have some in my freezer right now. The recipe calls for uncooked. I have it 1 cup of cooked, so we're going to be a little shy on the wild rice, but this will still be great, I'm sure. Here I'm going to mince those 2 cloves of garlic that I've got. And then I'm going to chop up the onion. I like this recipe also because it gives you lots of options to prepare. She gives Instant Pot, Crock Pot, and Stovetop directions. We're obviously starting with a little bit of oil in a stock pot on the stove, and we're just going to saute our onions. You can use, I used olive oil. Recipe says either butter or olive oil, and then we'll mix that up, make sure the onions are all coated, and we'll let those saute. Back at the cutting board, I'm going to finish chopping the sweet potatoes. It calls for a dice, so a little smaller than probably what I did. And again, it calls for dicing the celery, and I'm probably a little big on a dice, more like a chop. We'll do the same thing to the carrots. And guys, also, this is a vegan or vegetarian. You could do either one. She gives you options for both. I am going to be adding, I've got some cooked chicken, so I'm going to put a little bit of chicken in this too. Here we are back at the stove top. I've sauteed the onions. I'm going to put the garlic in, give that a mix, and we're just going to let that become aromatic. So just maybe another minute sauteing. Then back on the cutting board, we've got 2 really big handfuls of kale, and I've got, I'm just going to do a rough chop on this and then set that aside for later. Back on the stove, the garlic is ready. We'll go ahead and add sweet potatoes, carrots, and celery to the pot. And I'm adding 6 cups of chicken stock. You can use vegetable stock too. This just happens to be Walmart low sodium. Use whatever you've got. And here's my wild rice going in. It's still frozen. It'll be just fine. And we're throwing in 8 ounces of baby bellas. These are sliced. I have washed them. And then 1.5 tablespoons of Old Bay seasoning. And then we're going to give everything a good mix. That was just a little piece of onion I found on the counter. And we're going to just bring this up to temperature. So it's going to take a little while because of that frozen rice, but I just kind of keep my eye on it. I decided to go ahead and put the chopped chicken in at that point. And once it does come up to temperature, we're going to cover that and just let it simmer for about 30 minutes. Now, we have brought this to temperature. It's cooked for 30 minutes. I also have some frozen coconut milk in the freezer, so I'm going to use that. And this did freeze just fine. It's partially frozen. And we'll add our kale. Because my rice was already cooked, I would not have had to let that cook for 30 minutes. It does say that it would take 30 to 40 minutes if your rice was uncooked. I'll just let you know that my rice directions call for 55 minutes or longer to cook it. So be aware you may have some extra cooking time going on here. I'm going to check the seasoning now that this is cooked and I've got the kale mixed in. And you can choose to add salt and pepper or even more Old Bay if you like. I thought the Old Bay was just at the right level. We don't need any more salt in our house, but we'll add a healthy dose of pepper. Mix it up again, and guys, you're ready for dinner. This recipe is a little outside my wheelhouse. I'm not a huge fan of coconut milk, but I gotta be honest, in this recipe, all of the elements work together. This was really delicious. Rod and I both liked it, and we had lunches for the next couple of days. So I will keep this on the rotation for the winter time. It was delicious. And guys, remember I've got this flaxseed in my refrigerator I'm trying to use up. I forgot to add it for our dinner time entree, but guess what? At lunchtime, I added a couple tablespoons to the batch, and you couldn't even tell it was in there. So little extra nutrition and fiber. Win-win. Make this, guys. It was great. And our second soup, a salsa verde chicken soup. This one was real good too, guys. I've never had hominy in a recipe before, so I'll tell you about that when we get there. We're going to start by chopping an onion, and I'm peeling it here to get it ready to chop. Once I get those onions chopped, we're going to move over to the stove top, and basically we're going to be cooking our chicken and the onions together. The recipe calls for a pound of boneless, skinless chicken thighs, but guess what? I've got chicken breasts this time. We've started with I used olive oil. You use whatever kind of oil you've got. We've got our onions in here, and my chicken breast was in the freezer. So it has mostly thawed, and I'm going to cut it up with my scissors into this same pot. Guys, if you have good knife skills, I'm sure you're going to use your great knife to cut it with. I just am more comfortable using scissors to cut these into small pieces. When you get all of your chicken added to the pot, you're going to cook this, stirring often until your chicken is cooked through, and you want it to brown slightly. Now, the recipe states that it will take 8 to 10 minutes, and I found that cooking time to be pretty accurate. Keep in mind too, this could easily be made vegetarian if you wanted to use vegetable stock, and instead of adding the chicken, just double up on the beans. It calls for pinto beans, but you could easily add a couple different kinds of beans to make it to your liking. While that chicken is cooking up, we're going to go ahead and open and drain our can of pinto beans. It calls for no salt added. I had just regular pinto beans and hominy, and I put those both in my colanders, and then I'll let them I'll rinse out the cans, basically throwing that water on top of the beans or the hominy, and then I do finish it with a good rinse under the running water also. Then I'll just let these sit in the sink and drain till I'm ready to use them. So this has only taken a couple minutes to drain those cans. I come back over, we'll flip this chicken over, stir it up a bit, just break it up, make sure everything is cooking thoroughly, and then I'm going to run down in the basement and grab a jar of my canned salsa verde. I'm going to be using just dried parsley instead of the cilantro the recipe calls for, and the recipe also calls for an avocado, and I have found my avocados have gone bad in the fridge, so I'm just going to leave that out. Now, I did put in the chicken broth. It calls for 3 cups. I'm just going to use the whole can of chicken broth. And you saw what was left of that salsa verde. I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there too. Here comes the hominy and the pinto beans, and we'll give that all a stir. So let's talk hominy. Hominy is made from field corn that's been processed, and it's softened, and it kind of looks like popcorn almost. It kind of puffs up, and it really reminds me of using corn tortillas, just the smell that you would get from corn tortillas. Guys, you'll notice I added in my parsley and I'm giving a squeeze of lime now. And basically, once you mix those things in, your cilantro, if you're using fresh cilantro, this is ready to eat. This was also a little outside of our wheelhouse. It is one that Rod and I both liked. That smell of the corn is really prevalent. So if you're not a corn person, you're going to want to skip this one. But this was a good change of pace for Rod and I. We both enjoyed it. Now, this is another one that I snuck some more of my flax seeds in. If you are using the cilantro and the avocado, you can sprinkle a little more on top. The avocado can just be diced up and or sliced even and thrown on top. And it also says you can serve with tortilla chips, which we did have a bag of tortilla chips in the cupboard. And you'll see on top of mine there, I put a few crumbles of tortilla. So it was good. We'll have it again. This one came to me from my sister. We were on a girls' trip. I said if she had any soup recipes. I was looking for soup recipes to do this week. And this is one of her favorite recipes. She's given me some modifications to make, so we're going to utilize many of those. And I just noticed, originally I was only going to do a half recipe, and I forgot to double up on my veggies. The recipe calls for 4 carrots and 4 ribs of celery, and you can see there I just did 2. So it was still very good the way it was, but next time I will definitely throw in 4 carrots instead of the 2. We're going to chop up these stalks of celery also and get those ready to go in the pot. And we'll round out the carrots and celeries with a nice big onion, which we will also chop. As I was preparing this recipe, I did not know that I was to use bone-in chicken thighs. So, guys, I used chicken breast again for this recipe. I used about 2¼ pounds. The recipe called for 2½ pounds of bone-in. So mine was more chicken forward than yours might be. And of course, I was a little light on the vegetables. Oh well, next time I'll do it right. I've added my oil to my stock pot, and now I'm going to be cutting in some chicken pieces, and this will take a little while, so I'm going fast here. Just going to cut these into bite-sized pieces, and then we're going to saute them. You want to get them, it says dark golden brown. I just don't have patience for that, so I did more of a light brown, and then salt and pepper to taste. The recipe says this will take 3 to 4 minutes. You're supposed to do this in batches, and of course I did not. This is all one pot. This took me probably 10 minutes. Now, I should have known there was something up because it has you remove the chicken at a certain point when you could have just thrown the noodles in, and it's because they wanted you to remove the chicken, the bone-in chicken, so it would have time to cool off so you could debone the chicken and then throw the meat back in the pot. Of course, I didn't really need to do that. This is the step that I'm doing right here.
What's that?
Kind of a waste of time. I could have been sauteing my chicken and the onions at the same time. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and leave in about 2 tablespoons of the chicken juices. The rest are just going to go in the bowl here with this chicken that's cooling off. And then I'm going to use the roughly 2 tablespoons of liquid left in the pan to start sauteing my onions. You'll want to saute these onions for 4 or 5 minutes. And then if you're doing cloves of garlic, you'll add that in. Guys, tonight I'm just doing it quick, so I'm going to use my powdered garlic. But I will put that in for a minute or so and let that become aromatic before I move on to the next step. The recipe calls for 10 cups of chicken broth, and this is a 6-cup reduced sodium chicken broth that I'm using, and then I'm supplementing with 4 cups of my homemade chicken bone broth. These are right out of the freezer, so this is going to take a little bit of time to get these melted and to bring this chicken stock back up to temperature. So we're going to just take the 5 minutes or so that it takes and just stir this every once in a while to get these melted. Now, I mentioned my sister had a couple modifications, and one of them was to add 2 bouillon cubes. And I was planning on using some chicken base instead, but I have plenty of bouillon cubes, so what the heck. Now, this does make me wish that I hadn't added the salt that I added earlier, but it turned out just fine. So you guys be careful if you're on sodium restricted diets, just to make sure that you're not going to oversalt this. Eventually, this does come up to temperature, and we're going to add back in our chicken at this point. Then our carrots and celery, 2 bay leaves, either fresh thyme or dried thyme. I had dried, and it's a spice we use very, very sparsely. Jody recommended adding a half a teaspoon of rosemary, so I'll just crush these up a bit. She also adds a teaspoon of oregano. And now we're going to let this cook for 25 to 30 minutes. And remembering that my chicken is basically already cooked, I really wouldn't have had to cook it this long. If you're doing the bone-in chicken pieces, you'll definitely want to do 20 to 30 minutes. Once that has finished, and if you're doing bone-in, you're going to strain your broth off. I would not do this step the next time. This is when you would be letting your bone-in chicken cool off after cooking, which is all unnecessary if you just cook your chicken pieces, your chicken breast that's cut up into pieces fully. But following the directions, here's all the chicken broth that we're going to put back in the pot. And then you add your noodles, mix them up, and let them sit for 20 to 22 minutes off the heat. This is another suggestion that Jody had, to use either homemade noodles, or you can get noodles in the freezer section. The Reams frozen noodles is what she recommended. I had dried egg noodles on hand, so that's what I used. I forgot to turn the camera back on, so I'm just showing you I added a tablespoon of lemon juice and about a teaspoon of dried parsley, and then I mixed this together. And guys, this is your soup. It was absolutely delicious. It makes a ton. We'll have lunches or another dinner to eat down the road. 2 thumbs up and highly recommended. So what's your favorite soup this time of year? Guys, we hope you like our content. Please like, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you next week when we're cooking again.